Hi there. This is Janine, and I am so excited to be with you. I am talking today with an amazing thought leader. This is your Create and Grow podcast, and we are excited to have an amazing thought leader here with you today. I'm trying to figure out the Instagram connection. My life's work now is bringing the fact that the arts, music, theater, movement, dance, visual arts, tactile arts, natural arts, arts in nature. All of this is a part of our human experience. And as we continue the research on creative thinking, and those of you who follow my work, intercultural creativity, but also neurosomatic creativity and prismatic leadership, what does it look like to have the arts as an integral part of our learning experience, our life experience, and our connected experience, how we connect with ourselves and how we connect with each other. I'm excited to bring to the stage our wonderful thought leader who's doing great work, and I will bring you to the stage now. There we go. Hello.
Hello.
We have Dr. Thalia Goldstein, and she is an amazing person. I saw her on Dr. Cindy's podcast, and I was like, she is speaking my language. How do I get her to speak to our audience and to share her work? That's what I love to do, is just be an amplifier of people who are doing great work. And let me give you just a little bit of background about her. She's a former, which I would, the professional aspect is probably former, but I think you're always still a dancer and an artist, right?
Sure, yeah.
But your background says that you're a former professional actress and dancer and lifelong theater nerd. You're currently an associate professor and director of the Applied Developmental Psychology program in the Department of Psychology at George Mason University, where she directs Play Learning in Arts and Youth Lab called the PLAYlab, and co-directs the National Endowment for the Arts Lab as well. Yay, love the National Endowment Organization, and the Mason Arts Research Center as well. With her students and colleagues, she's published more than 70 papers on the effects of pretend play, imagination, theater, and other art forms such as dance, marching arts. You might have to explain that one.
I will.
Video games, and literature. And she's focusing on child and adolescent development. And she has a slew of degrees. And you have been co-editor of the Journal of Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and Arts. I would love to get more information about that. And you've been winning several awards, and I hope there's more awards to come because you are doing great work and helping people like me, not have to do our own research studies, but really pull your work in to support the work that we are all doing on our end. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Awesome. So let's just share a little bit of how you got to be where you are, like even a little bit about your childhood, any of those budding moments. I tell parents kind of like, watch your children because they're communicating to you where they're leaning in some of their strengths. So what was that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So lifelong theater nerd is absolutely the true statement. I did acting classes starting when I was about 9 years old. I took my very first acting class. And then I did theater and dance and gymnastics all the way from middle school through high school. And when it came time for me to go to college, I double majored in psychology and theater and did that for 4 years. And then when I graduated from college, I sort of said to myself, if I don't move to New York City now and try to make it as an actor and a dancer, there's never really going to be a better time. And so I moved to New York and did all the things you do when you're trying to be a professional artist as a young person in the big city. So I waited tables and worked as a nanny and did check-ins at the gym. And then I went to auditions and took classes and did, full-time summer conservatories and the like. So out on tour, came back again, back and forth. But after a few years, I decided, I missed the sort of psychology that I had done in college. I missed the research and the writing. And so I decided to apply to PhDs in psychology with anybody out there who was interested in imagination, play, the arts, creativity. And I ended up with a wonderful advisor, Ellen Winner, who was at Boston College and Harvard Project Zero and had been researching visual arts and children's creativity for many, many years. So I sort of said, okay, great. I'm going to write a paper about everything we know about theater and psychology and social skills and learning, because to me, having grown up in that world of theater, it seemed really obvious that my friends and I were working in this world of empathy. We were working in perspective taking. That's what theater was. That's what I had been taught in all of my acting classes. And I was very surprised at the end of my first year of graduate school to find that there just wasn't a lot of empirical work here from a psychologist's perspective, with all of the scientific controls that you would want to be able to get at how theater might lead to these different kinds of outcomes. And that's really what got my life's work started. So, almost 20 years later at this point, here we are.
Here we are in our secting points as well, because it has so many benefits that people who were in it either during childhood and adulthood, we almost feel it intuitively, right? I tell people I was actually on Wipeout. I don't know if you know the show Wipeout.
With the balls and the throwing you into the water.
I should find that clip and play it. But they brought me back to do like a audition for a commercial, and I had to really think that or pretend that Wipeout was a very traumatic event, right? And say, I can't believe I was on Wipeout, and I had to really get into character. And after the audition, I was like, wow, I am like emotionally spent. Like that was it really did something to me emotionally. Like I had to really focus on being traumatized by going on Wipeout. But it's just reminding me that when you are pretending, right, of how the brain works, of they say if you use your imagination or close your eyes and imagine you doing something, your brain kind of has a hard time figuring out what's imagined and what's real. Like you'll have an actual physical reaction, right?
Yeah, there's the sort of rehearsal, right? This is why rehearsal works, because your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference between actions as you're actually doing them and actions as you're imagining them, in the part of the brain that does that. But what happens instead is that the prefrontal cortex, which is where all your reasoning takes place, comes in and says, remember, this part is just pretend. And that's why you don't have the actual emotional reaction when you're just pretending. But that mental rehearsal, I mean, we used to use that in gymnastics all the time, right? Imagine your beam routine before you go up, and it really does help you learn and gain from there. Yeah. Acting training is the thing that teaches you how to do that, right? So with acting training, you can relive your traumatic experience on Wipeout, but not necessarily leave the room feeling emotionally drained.
Yes, yes. And with the tides turning as far as leadership training, because that's where I am now, I taught for 15 years in the kindergarten through fifth grade area. I taught third grade for a few years and then ran the music and the drama club, co-ran the drama club at my school, where we put on, the Lion King and Aladdin and just a lot of plays. And so I got to see it, firsthand of teaching the kids, how do you really step into that character? How do you really, feel that, like Lion King, that your pride has left, or there's just issues within your situation, and then having them get into character. And I think I've knowing what I know now, doing a better job. I don't know if you know who she's over at USC, Dr. Imarindo Yang. She does a lot.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Helen Immordio Yang. Yeah.
Yes. I was like, what's her first name?
Yeah.
Really groundbreaking work this year.
Wonderful
about
stuff.
The adolescent brain and transcendent thinking. How do you think theater really supports that work? If you can explain transcendent thinking for those who may not know what it is, and how do you think theater supports her work?
Yeah, so I will say from a scientific perspective, I'm less familiar with those neuroscientific findings, although I'm obviously familiar with her work generally. But I think when we talk about theater and what it can do for adolescents, one of the things that it does is that it makes it okay to try things that you might not ever otherwise try. It makes it okay to imagine situations that you wouldn't have otherwise been in. It asks you to release inhibitions and be playful. That's something I found in my studies on theater and my book on theater, is to think about how can I let go of this sort of self-judgment that adolescents really feel because they want to be sort of cool. They want to be part of their peer group. They don't want to be laughed at. How can I release those inhibitions in a theater classroom in order to fully portray the action or activity that's being asked of me? And, as with everything, as you work on it and as you practice it, any psychological skill, it's like a muscle, right? And the more that you can work on it and the more that you try it out in safe spaces, in places where you're not going to get in trouble for making a mistake, in places where being a little kooky or a little unusual or a little unimaginative is celebrated instead of sort of told like, no, we're sitting down and being still right now. The more you can practice that, the more likely it is that you can tap into it in situations in your everyday life where it might be useful and helpful. And one of the things that theater teachers do is they talk about, okay, we're going to do this exercise now during warm-up, but it's applicable when you're playing characters on stage. It's applicable when you need to talk to your friends. It's applicable when you leave this classroom. And that kind of explicit teaching, I want you to take this skill from this activity and move it into this other activity. That's the way that you can move beyond the current experience into what could be in the future. And I think that's what Dr. Amodio Yang is often talking about.
Yes, and a concept that that my co-teacher Megan Gardner, who does a lot of formative game design, she talks about transference, right? Like, how do we transfer the skills we're learning in class or in the lesson into real life? And that's really what we're looking to do for adults, right? It makes a little bit more sense for the kids because they're in an organized time of learning, which I'm telling people every day and every place is a learning environment, not just the classroom. Right? If you're at the store, that's a learning environment. So, but the concept of transference, how do we transfer, which we're going to get into the 8 acting habits of mind, right? How do I transfer these skills of emotional intelligence, of face reading, of body reading, body awareness which is one of your habits, and embodied cognition. Can you explain about embodied cognition? Because that's going to be, I believe, a big thing for this next future work.
Oh, absolutely. I'm kind of obsessed with embodied cognition, actually. So embodied cognition is, it's an old theory with a relatively new name, but basically the idea is your body and the way in which you understand your body and read your body and feel your body affects how you think. And so cognition, yes, happens in the brain, but the brain is constantly taking information from the rest of the body, and the way in which your body is interacting with your environment, is interacting with your space, when you're pretending to do things and when you're really doing them. And so embodied cognition is the way in which we understand the world as human beings that aren't just brains in a jar looking out, right? But as our full bodies sort of physically interacting with the world. This is actually one of the things that's so critical in the first early years of development. You need to let kids fall down, try things that maybe feel a little bit dangerous, figure out where their physical limits are, because it's through that physical interaction that they build an understanding of the world. This is research that is as old as Jean Piaget, who was the father of cognitive development, really finding that motor actions and physical actions are the best way to gain a thorough and deep understanding of how the world works. So embodied cognition is the sort of modern neuroscientifically supported version of this, which is that the brain is always reading what the body is and how the body's working. And the more that you can use that information, the better your actions and reactions are going to be to the world every day. It's key for emotion regulation. It's key for collaboration with other people. And what I've found is that it's key for theater as well.
So good, so good. I have a just short story like with my son. I have a six-year-old son, and he's the co-author of some books we're going to send you.
Cute.
I am creative, and my beautiful brain. That's him right there. But when he was, I don't know, 3 or 4, he was on like the monkey bars, and he grabbed the bars, but then I think one hand kind of slipped. And so he was hanging on. And as a mother, you're like, oh no, let me go and save him. But then I just felt something just like, Janine, just stand back and let's see what he does. And then he ended up getting that momentum and then moving his hand and grabbing on and then completing his task.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. But, I feel as parents, it's really important for us to understand that if we keep saving them, he now has that embodied cognition, that understanding that, hey, I could do this and this and complete my task in this way, or modify my steps and do it a different way. Or if I fall, I just fall on the wood chips and I just do it again. Right. And so, just having us understand and transferring that to other areas. I don't know if you remember the Varsity Blues. I bring this up all the time, but the Varsity Blues scandal where parents were writing checks to get their kids into the back door of prestigious university.
Oh yeah, the fake sports and that.
Yeah, and all that. Yeah. And people were looking at the parents, and there was a few famous ones, but my heart broke for the kids because what are we communicating to those kids? I don't trust that you have the ability to continue this task, either get in on your own merit, or if you try to get in and you don't, you go to plan B. All of these are those lessons the brain is taking in of how do I keep moving forward, even in the face of obstacles, or I have to switch ideas. Do you feel that theater is a way for students? And we're talking about, your work is focused on kids.
Yes.
I'm also focused on adults because we're trying to get adults to say, this is for everyone throughout the lifespan. Right?
Yeah. It's funny because I teach college students, I teach PhD students, and then I actually teach adults too, because I have a hobby job where I teach circus on the weekends. And it's the best. I highly recommend circus for everybody. But the ways in which we learn don't change as we develop. Our ability to take in more complex information, our ability to keep several things in mind simultaneously and build metaphors between them increases. Complexity, abstractness, right? The depth of knowledge increases as we get older, but the actual modes of learning, I think, stay relatively the same, right? It's better to do it on your own and figure it out on your own than it is to sort of sit passively and let somebody else just like lecture at you. When I teach college students and graduate students, my classes always involve physical movement and physical elements to it. And I often take tools and techniques from the theater classroom and use them in a class that's for PhDs in psychology. And the reason for that is because active experiencing and active learning is a really sort of fast pathway to deep understanding. So I want to make sure that, the stuff that happens in a theater classroom, like we all have to collaborate on a silly task like keeping a balloon in the air for 100 hits. It's not just teaching you the physics and arc and motion of a balloon, but it's also teaching you how many words you need to say to somebody else to get them to pay attention, and how many words you can sort of not say because you don't want to confuse them. Similarly, when we do things like role-playing exercises, like where I pretend to be somebody that I'm not in order to interview you about something you might have some knowledge about, if we do it in a pretend way, in a fun way, then it can be a little bit safer because it's not reflecting back on like, oh, if I ask the wrong question, that's something that I've done badly. Well, no, I'm not asking the question. Chip Chipperson, Action 9 News, is asking the question, right? And so what it allows for is that little bit of separation from reputation, right? And reputation management, which particularly for adult learners and adolescent learners, I think is a really big concern. So theater provides you with that little bit of distance and the sort of silliness playfulness of the actions that take place in a theater classroom can get you to learn things like collaboration and communication without necessarily being worried that everything you do is going to be graded and kept in your permanent record forever and ever.
Yes, I heard someone call it a marginalized consequence, right?
Yes, I love that. That's a great phrase. Marginalized consequences.
Yes, you're like,
Yeah,
you're not going to get fired. We're here to explore, right? And
exactly.
I love the distance. I actually heard a new term, which I'm so excited when I heard new term or hear new terms, which is why I was really excited to meet you. Is construal levels?
Sure.
Construed levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, the psychological distance of an event or an experience.
Yeah.
So looking at the details versus looking at everything from a big picture, looking at the forest for the trees or seeing the trees for the forest. So I was like, "Ooh, let me dive into that term."
Yeah. And people have individual differences at where they might want to start at, but everybody can zoom in and out if they're given guidance and leadership around, all right, I want us to look at this, as if we're looking back from 5 years, or I want us to find the smallest possible unit of change and go there.
So yes, I'm excited to dive into construal levels, but you touched on an important part. That's a big part of our research. When I left the classroom in 2019, working with, I call them creative geniuses, right? These 4-year-olds to about 10. And I started a nonprofit for the graduates, so 6th grade through 12th grade. And I taught at university, or Cal State University Northridge, for teachers who are getting their masters and looking at arts integration as well. So I wish I had your research back when I was doing that. But, now that I'm doing a lot of corporate training and, I bring in the Legos, right?
Oh, yeah.
I bring in the Play-Doh. And even when I do my keynotes, I have pipe cleaners. Number one, they're cheap. They're easy to transport. I can throw them in my luggage. But yeah, I'm just like, I don't want you sitting there for an hour as I talk to you. Now, I do tell stories. I have jokes. I have visuals and, and all that good stuff. But if you can create something during it, that to me is you participating in this experience, right? And then they get to have their created pipe cleaner. But my logo's the diamond, and I chose the diamond because of the metaphorical properties of, I can teach so many lessons from the metaphor of a diamond. But I think part of our work is to help people gain that skill. Like I do it automatically because I grew up with the arts as a part of my developmental experience, but not everyone has had that experience. How important is metaphorical thinking in your work, but also in the work of a leader in these ambiguous times where they have to influence groups of people and not just, coerce them and lead by demand, but they really have to move people from the heart?
Yeah, I think that, what metaphorical thinking, and I think a lot about representational thinking as well, which is sort of thinking about how one thing stands in for another, or one thing sort of is separated from reality but related back to reality. I think the key thing to keep in mind is that you can make parts of it explicit and parts of it implicit, right? That often when we talk about things like understanding other people and taking their perspectives, we sort of want to read minds from a distance and say, well, I'm not sure what they're thinking, but I think this and this and this and this and this. Where we know from ourselves that our reasons for doing things and our reasons for making choices are extremely complex, right? It's based off of personality. It's based off of previous experiences. It's based off of knowledge. It's based sometimes off of fear or off of concern and worry. And so really key, I think, for leaders, for people who want to inspire others, is to ask them, right? Like, what is it that you want? Where are your goals here? How can I help you think about what would work or not work for you in any particular situation? And then think about sort of how you can implicitly bring that out in somebody. I actually think this kind of artistic and creative thinking, it exists in all of us, even if we're not necessarily using it for creating fine art or, building something new. We're still using it when we cook dinner at night. We're still using it when we play with our kids on the weekends. And so I think it's about really opening up the ability to tap into what's already there, making it explicitly okay to want something artistic or something creative, and then implicitly providing the environment for people to step into that for themselves.
Yes, yes. And I actually, kind of separate the two because I feel like a lot of people don't think they're creative because they're not excellent in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just like creativity, it's connected to the arts, of course, but it's much bigger than that. You can find creative aspects in every field. And I define it, because I know it's an ongoing debate, but I was like, okay, well, here's a definition that we're going to root to. It's the process of problem finding, or sometimes I use the word challenge, but it's the process of problem finding and problem solving with relevance, value, and novelty. There's something new there, but it has value. Now, is that's just to you or to the masses as well. But a lot of creative people are not the ones just waiting for things to fall in their lap. They're actually being proactive and asking questions, right?
Yeah.
They're challenging sometimes the status quo. They're an observant. So we have the 7 gems of intercultural creativity, where we think cultural aspects affect creative thinking. Really quick, I'll go through them all, and then we're going to get into your 8 habits. But looking at mindset, right? We call it creative growth mindset off of the work of Carol Dweck. Empathy, we feel, hit cultural development and creative thinking. Observation, curiosity, perspective shifting, which you brought up several times. And then we say authentic adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you adapt in different situations, but your core values, your authentic placement. And then being a bridge. We believe that highly creative people are bridges within different social groups, right? They can see those connections, they can make those connections. And so we said, to grow your cultural development, you need these gems, but also to grow your creative thinking, these gems should be in place. Any thoughts about that?
I love that, because what I really like to think about too, in terms of helping people think about their creativity and helping people think about their creative problem solving, is that there are 4 levels of creativity. This is the work of James Kaufman, and it's widely accepted in the science of creativity studies. The 4 levels of creativity are big C, pro C, little c, and mini c, right? And when we talk about creativity, and when people say, oh, I'm not creative, usually what they're thinking about is big C creativity, right? Frida Kahlo, Marie Curie, Pablo Picasso, right? World changing, like nothing was the same after this person came in and did their thing, right? But that's one part of creativity. The other parts of creativity, so pro C creativity, is professional level creativity, somebody who's creative as part of their job. So a chef who comes up with new menu items, or somebody who works in advertising and is doing design for different products, or design for writing copy for advertisements, right? They're creative professionally within constraints and bounds. But then the rest of us, we have access to little c creativity, which is everyday creativity. Are you drawing in your sketchbook for yourself? Or do you like to come up with funny dance moves and, maybe put them on TikTok, or maybe just do them with your kids in your living room? And then there's mini c creativity, which I think is fascinating, because when people learn about it, they go, oh, right, I do know how to do this. Mini C creativity is all about learning, and it's all about learning something new for yourself. So an example of this that I love is I bought a house a few years ago, and for the very first time, I have my own outdoor space, which I've never had before. And so I wanted like a wild cottage garden with, flowers that are local to the area that I live. And I wanted it to be, birds and bees and species and that kind of thing. And I just started like randomly buying stuff and planting it, which is like not a great way to like have a plan for a garden. And then after a while, I was like, oh, I need to read this book. I need to sort of talk to these people. I need to try and see what works or doesn't work in this area of my backyard. That is mini C creativity. There's plenty of people out there that know lots and lots about gardens and have done creative stuff with their gardens. But for me and for my situation, I was being creative in my garden, in my backyard, in my situation. And that can be true for everything. So I think thinking about metaphor and building connection You don't have to be thinking about it at the big C level where you're going to change the world with your idea. You can really be thinking about all of these aspects that you just talked about at the mini level, personally for me, or at the little level, just my like sphere of influence and my colleagues and my like one thing that I can make a difference in. And I think that breaking free of this notion that you have to change the world in the next half an hour can be very, very helpful if what you actually need is to take that next step forward in your creative thinking for your problem solving.
Yeah, that's so good. And, and I also, I think about that from a cultural lens as well,
Mm-hmm.
coming with just different different demographics about how we communicate that freedom. Sadly, I do think that sometimes our school system, has aspects in it that kind of work that out of our students to really just engage with the content with the goal of producing something new. I tried to work it in my classroom. I had a little bit more freedom to do that, but whether it be in music or in math or in writing, if the kids were learning Beethoven Ode to Joy on the recorder, and they were learning their notes, but also letting them know, you can use these notes and you can create your own song. And then going to the transcendent level with, Dr. Mary Helen's work of saying, okay, well, what does this music mean to you? Let's look at Beethoven's life. Let's see how he was resilient, even, after he lost his hearing, and how he still contributed. Now, his work was big C, right?
Right, absolutely.
But the thing is, sometimes we don't know. Sometimes our work could be at a higher level of C, but we won't know that until we get that practice on that mini C level, and that we're made aware of it.
Yeah.
Sadly, in some marginalized communities, we're not even made aware that we can do this, and if, just because we're not seeing examples. That's why I'm really big
Right.
with my son, seeing examples of mini C,
Mm-hmm.
pro C. He sees me. That's why we write books. I put his name. He has copyright on it. I want him to know this is what we do. We don't just learn stuff and then take the test or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We learn it, we embody it, we move it, we dance it out, we write songs about the life cycle. But then we say, okay, well, how can we share this with the world? What do we learn about it? How's our life like a cycle in our development or in our evolution? Like, I'm trying to take all of your research and Dr. Mary's research and everyone's and say, okay, well, what does this look for our family? How can we be at that level? So what are your thoughts about how can the school system do a better job with developing the creativity and curiosity of our students as well?
I think it really comes down to enabling teachers and letting teachers know that it's okay for them to give students that space and that freedom. I think it often comes from a curricular perspective or from an administrative perspective of trusting and giving confidence to and giving space and time and frankly resources to your teachers to work with those individual students at the level at which they're working and give them the freedom and the confidence to build something for themselves and to not just have to parrot back what they're being taught. And this is a hard thing, right? I mean, we really know that it takes time and resources and freedom to be able to create something new, to go beyond what is sort of directly set out in front of you. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about theater, and one of the things that's really interesting about the theater classroom, is that there is a period of exploration and a period of allowing for improvisation that is built into theatrical curricula. It's not just about memorizing a set of information and then repeating it back again, or having a set and a standard that you have to achieve before you're allowed to do anything for yourself. It really is from the jump, the philosophy of a theater education is to come up with your own ideas and come up with your own responses. And even if they're the same responses that every student for the last 25 years has had to that prompt, they're still yours to develop and to learn for themselves. So I think, it's really hard. It's really hard to get a school system on board with backing away from I learn X, then I learn Y, then I learn Z, then I learn A, then I learn B, then I learn C, right? Like, and to say, we're going to open this up. We're going to let for exploration to happen where it happens. We will eventually hit these learning goals, but we're not going to hit them on a set schedule that I can build out for you. That's like the scariest thing in the world, right? And so you really have to give teachers and students the space and time for exploration. And one of the things that I think is really also, theater is my thing, right? So everything comes back to theater education for me. One of the things that's really great about the theater exercises and the sort of set of standard theater scripts and theater ways of learning and ways of working is that they can be individualized to every single context. So in the study that I did that is under my book, I went to 5 different school districts across the United States, and I wanted to make sure that I was hitting not just the schools where there was lots of money and lots of time and lots of parent support for theater, and not just the schools where students had to audition and pay in order to get into them. So I did go to a private conservatory, but I also went to a public magnet school in Boston that's majority students of color, where you don't have to pay to go to this school and get 15 hours of high quality arts education every single week. And you get to go regardless of what your family background is, regardless of what your academic achievement is, and regardless of free and reduced lunch status or neighborhood status or anything else. And so the students in this school are getting this chance of open exploration in their art form and engagement with the creative process of their art form. And they're not worried about what their math grades are, and they're not worried about what their English grades are. And they still get a high school diploma, and they're still getting a high quality education in the field of math and English and social studies and history. But the arts are fully part of that process.
And I just want to jump in there because that is huge. I actually interviewed someone who's a voice actor now and a voiceover coach. And she said, in elementary school, she really wanted to go out for the theater program, but her grades were too low. So they kept it. And as a music teacher, I would have, teachers say, oh, Johnny and Susie can't come to music because they didn't do their math, or whether it was like, well, maybe Johnny needs to come to music in order to be more successful in math. And my own personal journey is, I have a speech impediment. I went through years of speech therapy, labeled as a special education student throughout my elementary time. And, I realize, if you know anything about the brain, a lot of times people who stutter, they don't stutter when they sing. Mm-hmm. Right. And so my mom put me in music. I played the trumpet. And then I also realized my stutter decreased because of theater. If I would memorize my lines and practice them, I was more, it increased fluency. And then I would move. If you see me on stage, I move a lot with my body, but that's also one of my tactics to lower my stutter. And, I feel like I'm the walking poster child of what it means to allow a person, a human being, to engage with the arts in order to fully develop in areas, because I couldn't speak, fluently, but it was the arts that gave me my voice until I was able to develop my voice. And I wonder how many kids are in that situation, whether it be speech impediment or neurodivergent or just any other issues, or just sometimes shy and introverted, right? That they don't have access to that whatsoever. And how many gems are we losing a day because they don't have your programs and other music programs there? But yeah, so much we can talk about that. But let's get to your 8 habits of mind. Let's start with body awareness and control. That is huge in leadership, being aware of your emotional, like your resting face, right?
Yeah,
Learning how to listen. How do you, what do you have to tell us about the body awareness and control?
Yeah. So, each of these 8 habits of mind were available to students in every single classroom that I looked at. I looked at 40 different classrooms across 5 different school districts. Everyone was between the ages of 13 and 18. But as I mentioned, this was the only theater class they were ever taking. Some were doing 15 hours a week of conservatory training. Body awareness and control was really the one that popped out first and was the strongest sort of day by day, because the actor's body is their instrument, right? Violin in music, trumpet in music, the paintbrush or clay in the visual arts. In dance, you're also using your body, but you're not using your body as yourself. You're using your body as metaphor for music and for movement and the art form there. Theater requires you to know what your body is doing and then subtract from it or add to it in order to be able to achieve the goal of the theater exercise or the theater classroom. And the more you can understand your body, as we talked a little bit about in embodied cognition, the better you're going to be at emotion regulation, at understanding what you're feeling and why you're feeling it in any particular moment, and then being able to say, okay, this is the appropriate response for this context. This is a way I can calm myself down before I go on stage or before I have to lead a meeting or something like that. So body awareness and control is part of every exercise in the theater, whether that's meditation at the beginning of it or, fully talking as Romeo and Juliet in a scene study at the end.
I love it because that's really what neurosomatic creativity is about. How do we better attach people's brain and mind? And now I know they're highly connected. I do separate the two. And I know there's controversy with like, what is the brain and what's the mind, right? Lots of data.
It's all the same thing for me. The brain is the mind. The mind is what the brain does.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And, but for me, I feel like my mind is so much, so bigger, like I feel connected to nature with my mind, even though my brain is, which I do, carry around a brain. Like to me, my brain is this three pound organ. And if something happens to it, it does affect my mind, which but just almost from a spiritual level, I feel my mind has those aspects as well. But just so to the body, so the brain, the mind, the body, how can we better connect those in order to increase our creative thinking in non-arts areas, right? By using the arts. That's what neurosomatic creativity is. And so that's body and awareness and control. And then your second one is release inhibitions and be playful. You touched on that a little bit before, but any other gems from that one?
Yeah, that's really about being in that safe space where you feel like you're not going to be made fun of or chastised or punished for doing something a little weird or doing something that's out of the norm. It's interesting because people often, when I've talked about release inhibitions and be playful, people are like, oh, it's fun, it's joy, it's silly. But actually, in one of my schools, we had a group of students that were putting on a play in which one of the characters had to say some pretty horrific racist things as part of being a character in the play. And the girl who was playing this role she didn't want to do it, right? She said, I can't play this character. I never would think these things in real life. My best friends would be affected if I said these things. I don't want to do it. And the teacher in an act of real, totally normal every day for a theater teacher, but an act of real empathy and compassion, worked with this student to say, listen, the goal here is to show the audience why these statements are harmful and show the audience why this is not the way we want the world to work and why this is bad and why they need to think differently. And only by showing them the truth of what it does, only by you as the actor sort of saying, yes, I disagree with everything I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it truthfully anyway. Only then will the audience be able to go, oh, in the truth of that, I see the horror of it. In the truth of that, I see how harmful it is. And that's releasing inhibitions too, right? That's also sort of finding that you can separate from this thing for the greater goal of showing what we could be instead of what we are.
And going back to theory of mind, right? And that's huge. I saw a wonderful teaching on it by Dr. David Eagleman over from Stanford, looking at the theory of mind and really that perspective shifting, right? And it almost increases empathy, right? Yeah, because there's so much there. But I want to get through the 8. There's a lot of new research on imagination, sometimes bringing this to corporate and to leadership. It's like frou-frou, rah-rah, but imagination is pretty critical, especially when you're talking about creativity. What do you have with imagination and envision as far as your habits of mind for leadership?
Yeah, so I would say that imagination, we use it all the time and we don't even know. So anytime you have to make a decision between two options, you engage in counterfactual thinking. Okay, if I put resources to decision A, here's what I think is going to happen. If I put resources to decision B, here's what I think is going to happen. Will decision A be better, or will decision B be better? That's imagination. You are imagining the next steps of what may happen if you go beyond your current perceptual inputs and the current here and now and figure out what may happen as you go down path A or as you go down path B. And building that skill to think about all of the possibilities in those two directions is how you make better decisions. Now, we know from lots of research on what's called affective forecasting that we're not as good as knowing how we're going to feel as a result of certain decisions. But the more you can imagine the consequences of different choices that you make, and the broader you can envision the outputs, the better off you're going to be when it comes to decision making. So that's where imagination and envision takes place.
Yes, and I love books, by the way. So Dr. Michael Platt over at the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, he has a wonderful book called The Leader's Brain. It's right there, and he talks about fictive learning, right? About how to make that end scenario. So I try to do that with my son. Well, the story ended this way, but what's another way that it could end? And these are all practices that we can transfer into real life, right? And so considering others, that is huge, especially as we get into our empathetic aspect of this workforce. As AI comes up, machine learning, we need to increase our ability to understand other people. How does theater do that?
Yeah, what's interesting about consider others in theater is when I asked several hundred theater teachers, like, what's the number one thing that you think theater teaches students besides acting skills? They all say empathy. But empathy is sort of a slippery concept, right? By empathy, do I mean I understand what you're thinking? I feel what you're thinking. I feel sorry for you. I feel altruism and want to behave sort of in a pro-social way towards you. In the scientific literature, we often talk about empathy as a concurrent, meaning at the same time, and appropriate response to somebody else's emotions. So joy with your joy, anger at your sadness, sadness for your fear, those kinds of things can all be empathic responses. What consider others does in the psychology of theater is that it brings it out to a sort of larger level. This idea that you need to consider the perspectives of your character and the knowledge and beliefs and desires and intentions of what your character wants. You also have to take the perspective of your audience, and how is your audience going to understand what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're doing as you act and as you behave. And then you also need to be able to consider, well, what is it that my fellow actors on stage with me? What is it that my collaborators want? With me, from me, for themselves, right? You have to know that everybody around you has as complex a mental life as you have, right? That everybody has all of these different aspects of their personality and previous behaviors and everything else that comes into play out in what it is that they want and need and desire. And so consider others in the theater classroom asks the students to do this at the large scale. At the small scale for, okay, why does this character say this line in this moment? What is their objective? What is the tactic that they're using? But then also, how can we get across to an audience the big idea of what we're trying to do here? So all of that comes into consider others. Almost
going back to theory of mind and construal levels, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's all included in there.
Awesome. And so that's connected to thinking collaboratively as well, or is that a little bit different?
Well, collaboration is also about the applied nature of considering others, right? So you need to be able to consider others for yourself in order to decide what you're going to do. But then you also need to use that information in order to collaborate. So there's slightly different skills. Collaboration is about the communication of what you want, what you think other people want, and how you're going to work together to achieve a goal, right? So that's really all about making sure you're on the same page as to what is the problem that we're trying to solve here, and then what are the best ways in which we're going to solve it. So collaboration works in a theater classroom, even if you're just doing a monologue, because of course you need to collaborate with your director, your producer, your lighting designer, your costume designer. You need to figure out, like, how are you going to collaborate with the audience to make sure that they're coming along with you on whatever journey it is that you're trying to take them. So collaboration is, yes, that theory of mind, that perspective taking, that considering of others, plus the communication aspect of it, plus this aspect of goal setting and goal achieving. And so that it can take different tactics depending on what group you're in and the roles that the people around you play in that group.
So good. I remember I saw a short Instagram, and the guy was like, if you want to hire someone who can get the job done, hire a musical theater kid.
Oh
If
yeah.
you want to hire someone who can team build and influence and get everyone on on the same page, hire a musical theater kid. And I was like, he is so correct.
Yeah. Or a stage manager. Get a stage manager in there
Yes.
and they'll get everything done right away.
Totally. And that's a good point. It's not just the actors on stage, but the whole production working in a beautiful symphony,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Um, yes. And so I love these next two because especially the one after the one we're going to talk about, because I haven't really thought about this one, and Dr. Cindy brought it up as well. So, but the first one is we are on, what are we on? 6?
Be flexible and commit to choices.
Yes, be flexible. What is that? Because I'm thinking divergent thinking. Could you expand?
That's exactly it. Divergent thinking. So, actors are constantly being asked, okay, that was one way you could have done it. How else? How else could you do it? What else might this character be thinking? How else could you answer this question? What is another physical action you could take here? What's another response you could have to this improv prompt, right? So the students in my theater classrooms were constantly being asked to be flexible in their thinking. And that's exactly what divergent thinking is. It's that brainstorming time where you're like, okay, well, how else could we solve this problem? What other materials could we bring in? What are the other options for us here? And of course, it's all connected back to imagination and envisioning, back to collaboration, back to considering other people. But specifically in the theater classes, you don't go with your first impulse. You try it, you see if it works, and then you try something else. And does that work? No? Okay, great. You try something else. And so the students were really being asked to integrate this idea of flexibility into all of the actions that they were taking. And that is very much paired with commit to choices. So every acting coach that you will ever work with will say, you get one choice at a time. Because if you try to play both happy and sad and confused, the audience is going to have no idea what you're doing, right? You have to be clear in the information that you're trying to give about your character or about your response so that everybody else in the room knows what it is that you're doing. So you have to commit to one choice. But the beautiful thing is, if that choice doesn't work, you're flexible. You go try another choice. You have to commit to it though. Really try it out. Follow it down that path. See what happens when you do it. If it works, great. And if it doesn't, we back up and we're flexible. And so be flexible, commit to choice. Be flexible, commit to choice until eventually, particularly as you get into producing plays and the professional world, you make a set of choices. You say, these are the best choices we can make. And then you move forward. And that's what the sort of set show, the frozen show looks like as you go forward in your theater experience.
Frozen, let it go.
Exactly.
And that is huge in leadership, right? Because we need people to be able to look at all the options and look at the perspectives of all the options. But when it's time to move forward and commit, you got to commit.
Right.
And
think about how bad it is if your leader says, okay, we're going to go that way, and then gives you like a quarter of the resources that you need in order to make that program happen. That leader hasn't committed to that choice. They're still sort of feeling out, leaving some money behind to go in the other direction. You're not going to be successful because you weren't given the resources you need to commit to that choice.
And your last and final 8 of the 8 habits of mind that we get from theater and we need in leadership to transfer that is a big one that I've been writing about since 2019 when I did my first book on financial literacy and reflecting on how we make our financial choices, is reflect and think metacognitively. Now, define that term, and then why is that so important for theater, but also for leadership today?
Yeah, for me, this is the one that sort of ties the other 7 together to be this sort of package of what theater can do for social, emotional, and cognitive skills. So metacognition is thinking about thinking. It's reflecting back on what you're doing and why you're doing it, and does it work? And if it works, why does it work, or how it might work differently, right? So let's say you've now committed to a choice, right? You're going in this direction. It would be sort of foolhardy to say, and then we never thought about it again, right? We did no follow-up surveys. We had no idea whether or not we made money off of it. We did not know if our students, were happier, or whether they, were more likely to go to college, or whether they scored higher on the end of the year tests, right? You have to reflect on your choices. You have to figure out whether what you're doing is working or not working. And then you have to think about, why and how you might change it. And that's all built into reflection and metacognition. Students in the theater classrooms were taught how to do this, right? This is not something we often teach, actually.
Good point.
In the educational system. But students in the theater classroom, in the very first few weeks of classes, were told, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to just observe and tell me physically, what are you seeing? Well, I'm seeing that she's standing tall and he's sitting down. Great. I'm seeing that they're close together or far apart. Awesome. I'm seeing that they're moving really, really quickly through this monologue. Cool. So those are actual observations that they're seeing in front of their eyes. The next step after that is, well, I'm seeing that the fact that they were moving so fast through the monologue meant I couldn't hear them. Okay, so that's the consequence of the choice that they make. I saw that the fact that he was sitting down and she was standing up gave a distinction between the power in the two of them in this scene. Okay, great. That's our interpretation of what we're observing. And so the students were being taught that there's the level of observation, there's the level of interpretation, and then there's the level of what we call mechanism, which is why are things looking the way that they're looking. And by thinking about each of those levels and reflecting on each of those levels, you can then make a value judgment. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this working? Is this not working? Where can we make change? Where can we move on? And it's through that reflection and metacognition that you learn about your learning. And you learn about whether or not you're getting to where you want to go. And so this is broadly applicable. Basically, anytime you're learning something new, you need to go through an evaluation process about whether or not it's working. And it's just built, it's in the water that you're swimming in when you're in a theater classroom, because everything is about, it's not working, let's try something new. You got to figure out whether or not it's working first. So it really was key in all of the theater schools that I tested.
Awesome. So I do know you have a hard stop. So I just want to end with your final gem. What's a final gem that you wish to leave the audience about all the work that you do? You know, the good old abstraction into one sentence.
Just one sentence out of the whole thing. Oh gosh. Well, I will say that okay, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna say two. So number one is don't forget about the body. Right? Like, don't forget that even adults need to get up and move around. And even adults are going to learn things more deeply when they're actively and physically engaged in the process. So fake out a case study and have them actually work on it, right? Put together a group and have them negotiate something. Actually practicing, right? Pretending, role playing, that's physicalized, that's personalized. That's the way you're going to get into the depth. So that's number one. And then number two, along those lines, is removing some of the consequences and making things playful, making it a bit of a game, making it fun, will get people to take chances and will get people to try things out that just might work better than if they were feeling all inhibited and scared. So use the body and be playful.
Awesome. Awesome. And set that psychologically safe environment where they can use both.
Exactly.
Wonderful. And if people wanted to reach out to you, where's the best place for them to find you?
So please feel free to contact me through my website. So it's theateredmatters.com. It's also thaliagoldstein.com. I'm a very Googleable person, happily, because of my name. And I'd be happy to chat there. I'm also on Blue Sky these days at Thalia R. Goldstein and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to take you off the stage and feel free to carry on the rest of your day. But the work that you're doing is amazing. I am honored to be one of your big mouthpieces, and I'll probably be incorporating a lot of your work into my keynotes and my trainings and telling people who I am in contact to go check you out.
Thank you so much. This was such a great chat. I really enjoyed it.
Yes. And just know that you're doing great work, and we're so happy. I'm happy to be alive while you're on the earth. So keep on, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. So that was just amazing to have her with us. I just want to reiterate the fact that that the arts are such an important part of your lived experience, no matter where you are in your lifespan, but something also to keep in mind for those who are in charge of other human beings in your social sphere, meaning you might be a parent, grandparent, a caretaker, a team leader, a senior leadership of an organization, senior leadership of a faith-based organization, wherever you have influence, please be mindful of how you can bring actionable things to the people who you are serving and growing, to help them be better thinkers, better leaders, and live better lives. And this that you heard today is definitely something that should be on your list of things to incorporate. She has wonderful resources on her website that we showed right there. Theater Ed Matters. Here's a toolkit for teachers, and don't think you have to be a classroom teacher to use this. It could be for leaders, for parents, for you, right? You can check these out and do them yourself. And she has other resources like the 8 Habits of Mind, and then of course her book. But you know me, I am all about bringing in music, especially at the early part of life, but throughout the lifespan. We're looking at the research on how music affects the brain for hearing, speech, and noise, for pushing off things like certain dementias. We're looking at things like movement, why it's important to move throughout your lifespan, especially as you get older. I'm in my 40s, and it's like, okay, Janine, get up and do your movement. I put on my headphones and just dance around. And all these things matter. And so we need to think about how we're thinking, and it's not just for them. It's not just for professionals. Sadly, a lot of people think like, I'm not a professional singer, so I shouldn't sing. I'm not a professional dancer, so I shouldn't dance. But it's actually for every human being because it's a critical part of our lived experience. So thank you once again to our wonderful guests. Please go check out her resources. Go get her book. I know I'm going to get her book and then to recommend it to all the teachers that I work with. I do keynote speaking for K-12. I do keynote speaking for the university level and for corporate. And we also do training on intercultural creativity, which is the intersection of cultural development and creative thinking. And we do training on neurosomatic creativity, which is how do we use the arts and bring them into our normal professional development training to help people excel in non-arts areas, right? Marketing, sales, accounting, leadership. And it's all connected. The brain research is finally here for us to prove it to you. It's not just our intuitive opinion saying it, but it is all connected, and it's meant for us to have a life well lived. I hope you enjoyed today's show and got some gems. I know I did. I just love being around people who know stuff. And have a good rest of the day. We'll see you next time, and be creative and shine bright. Bye-bye.